You know, for someone named Carbonic Pikmin, I really haven't had the chance to do all that much relating to the Pikmin franchise. Well, I think it's about time that I changed that. I've been screaming into the ether about wanting Pikmin 4 for fucking ages now. About 7 years by this point, and 5 years since Miyamoto said the game was nearing completion. So I figured that I'd put that screaming to use and actually vocalize it into my wishes about a game I've wanted so desperately. As Pikmin 4's game we've seen literally nothing of, not a single ounce of gameplay footage, that means that all we have right now are our wishes and hopes, with no way of knowing how the development of the game is going. These wishes might not be in the most orderly form, but they are truly what I wish to see in a future Pikmin game. So, the first and absolute most important request, this game must be a sequel to the mainline Pikmin series. It absolutely cannot be a reboot of any kind, as that would be a detriment to the series. Pikmin has been consistently building up an extremely dense and rich world, character, and lore for years now, and to throw all that away right now would be a fucking moronic move, and one I can only hope they wouldn't dare make. They already have a perfectly functional setup for a fourth storyline, with Louis being left behind on PNF 404 once again after the events of Pikmin 3, and if for some reason they don't want to follow up on that plot point, there's plenty of other ideas you could use. A personal favorite of mine would be Olimar taking his family on a space vacation, only for something to, no surprise, go horrifically wrong, resulting on him crashing on PNF 404 with his family, giving a 4-character adventure of Olimar, his wife, his son, and his daughter. One more obvious thing they out of the way as well, bring back the Piklopedia. It was very questionably absent from Pikmin 3 for no real reason, despite being one of the best aspects of Pikmin 2, and it inextricably improved the world building, character building, and lore building of the franchise as a whole. It even came back in motherfucking Hey Pikmin. There was no excuse for it not to return by this point. Anything else is just an L. I would personally like it to be more like its Pikmin 2 variant and its Hey Pikmin variant as well. The deeper scientific analysis provided on each of the creatures helped expand the history of the creatures in the series, gave them family trees, expanded upon the trees, and even gave their attributes and physiology full explanations. While Hey Pikmin is more of Olimar performing simple observations related to the creatures and his experiences with them. The Pikmin 2 variant was just much more interesting and did more for the franchise overall in my eyes. I'd also love for the end of day logs to return, just as detailed and interesting as they were in Pikmin 1 and 3. Although the emails in Pikmin 2 coming back would be just as good, either or, I'll be happy, I just want them back. Moving on to elements involving the gameplay structure itself, I personally want the game to be more of a complement between elements of my favorite game in the series, Pikmin 2, and Pikmin 3. So expect a large amount of the aspects I talk about to be a mixture of elements from these two games, but with a larger lean towards how Pikmin 2 was designed. The biggest thing I could ask for in Pikmin 4 would be the return of caves from Pikmin 2. I think caves were the best element that was added to that game, and single-handedly pushed that game to my favorite in the franchise. Caves added a dungeon crawling element to the series and allowed for a focused challenge of the combat with the enemies and finding treasures, and utilized the very fundamentals of Pikmin to the absolute best in my opinion. I'd love for caves to stay structurally the same that they were in Pikmin 2, but just be expanded upon. One of the only issues I really have with the cave systems was the somewhat limited palette of environments. So one request would be to increase the amount of locations that could be generated from a variety, such as say, a more crystalline cave, one filled with vines, or a heavily ice-based one with snow and ice crystals. And maybe more that are based on more house-like areas like the ones Pikmin 2 had. I always loved the idea of caves where you're jumping into them, and they eventually lead down to the remnants of an old human home. It gives more variety to caves that would make them even more enjoyable to revisit and replay, and increase the replay value even further. Among the extra locations, obviously I'd also like for more cave-exclusive enemies, as ignoring the world building these creatures provided, it also helped keep caves more interesting and distinct from the above-ground areas you'd be exploring. More hazard types or different types of cave traps keep things interesting would also be very appreciated, and for some of the minor flaws in cave generation to be ironed out, as while it was a very good generation system, it did have a few mistakes that could happen on rare occasion. Now that I've talked relatively extensively about the caves, I should talk about what I want out of the overworlds as well. On top of keeping the cave system, I'd love to have the overworlds with the same density, detail, and scope of the overworlds in Pikmin 3, which were just larger and more grand than the ones in any of the previous games. Having multiple large but immaculately designed overworlds modes on top of several moderate but generated caves would help keep the game incredibly replayable and inject great variety into the gameplay. Continuing on with fusions of Pikmin 2 and 3's design philosophies, I think looking at how I like bosses to be handled is next in line. I think it'd be best if they were kept as they were in both 2 and 3, just like how we're keeping both 2's caves and 3's super detailed overworlds, as keeping both types of boss designs here works out pretty well. Pikmin 2's bosses took the design idea of being shorter, more optimizable encounters, with multiple ways to take them down quickly, but still being threatening encounters, and I think this works out perfectly as challenges that you run into at the end of caves to top off your dungeon crawling experience. Meanwhile, I think Overworld should have one much larger, more intricate and grand boss, just like the ones in Pikmin 3, which were often either multi-stage, had a specific puzzle involved in the defeat, or were just significantly more robust than previous encounters. The overworld bosses would feel like truly the capstone of an area, potentially serving as the final challenge in the area, while Pikmin's 2 boss designs would still fit perfectly in the cave idea, allowing for a true blend between Pikmin 2 and 3's boss designs. Moving on to what I consider to be one of the most important elements of Pikmin, which is often overlooked actually, and is very much so under the hood of the game, would be its music. While not generally the most iconic stuff you'll ever hear, Pikmin's music is just as important to its core as its gameplay. In fact, they've been inextricably tied since the beginning. Pikmin takes heavy use of dynamic music, and I need to absolutely emphasize how important it is that this comes back, especially to the degree that it was in Pikmin 2. Pikmin 2 had the soundtrack change for literally every action you could take, for every state you were in, even for the time of day. There were variations of the main area theme playing to help you immerse yourself into the experience and become part of the feedback loop. While Pikmin 3 did do a good job of keeping the dynamic music going, it didn't have as many variations as Pikmin 2 did for 2 major reasons. One, it just didn't have as much music as Pikmin 2 did total, as Pikmin 2 had the caves and the various cave themes that would come along with it, and reason 2 being Pikmin 3 only had 1 sunset variations for the overworlds, as opposed to as many sunset variations as there were daytime variations like 2 did. What I want Pikmin 4 to do is to have the same level of dynamicism as Pikmin 2's OST, while also having the musical quality of Pikmin 3, as well as adding the dynamicism of other tracks, such as the boss themes like 3 did. I'd also like for cave themes to stay as the more beautiful, esoteric, and atmospheric tracks like they were in 2, while the above ground tracks would be like they always have, with more melodic and structured themes. But that leads to another idea that I've been throwing around. What if the Pikmin count was fully uncapped from 100 to a larger 200? Or perhaps 150 count if you don't want to go fully double. A full 200 will allow for each captain to manage 50 Pikmin each, and if the game is going to largely increase in scope like I'm wishing it to, having such large-scale multitasking options would really help in the options you're going to have in going about playing the game. But maybe 200 Pikmin is just too much to bring into a cave. Maybe limitations should be put in place. Only 100 Pikmin per cave? And maybe 4 captains at once could also make a cave too easily, so you could limit the amount of captains that can enter a cave. Maybe cave difficulty scales, so the number of Pikmin and captains you can bring into a cave fluctuates. Or maybe for a more unique cave, you can only bring 1 captain, but 150 Pikmin? Or maybe this feature of caves being scaling with how many Pikmin or captains you can bring into it could be saved for something else. Another idea. That idea being one that is extremely out there and could potentially cause issues with creating another Pikmin game utilizing caves. So I'm not demanding it, but how about a cave creator? Allowing users to toggle the options and create their own caves to share with other players? This could give the game even more longevity and allow for a thriving community. I can already imagine the amazing caves people could put together. Among the Kaizo traps others would go with. Plus adjusting Pikmin counts and captain counts, it could create a game I wouldn't put down for a very, very long time. Speaking of alternate modes, I'd love to see the challenge mode from Pikmin 2 return, in which there were 50 extra caves that were created that could be played by yourself or with a second player. These caves allow for the devs to create more unique, specific, and one-time challenges. Bringing them back would not only be a fun side activity, but also give possible ideas for how to go about cave design in the potential cave creator I mentioned. 2-player battle has also become a staple that needs to return, and if 4 characters are indeed playable, what would be stopping a 4-player battle mode? Even more chaotic and more balls to the wall than a normal 2-player battle. I don't have much experience with Pikmin 3's challenge mode, but it looks like that could be a great side mode as well. Although maybe asking for this on top of the cave challenges returning would be asking for a bit too much, but hey, this is a wish list. Getting crazy is kind of the point. So, for a crazy idea, I'd love for there to be some sort of section where you explore the overworld during the night. This is honestly a mechanic you could base an entire Pikmin game off of, so maybe don't go too deep into it lest we overcomplicate things, but maybe just a scripted sequence in the plot in which you're forced into the overworld at nighttime and have to survive through stealthing and your own skill could be a really cool little section in an incredibly memorable moment. Despite being such a massive Pikmin fan, it really hasn't had much of a presence on my channel, and I hope to change that. I have plenty of ideas for what I can do for Pikmin-related content. There might not be any in the immediate future, though, due to the other video plans I've just kind of let accumulate. Unless there was an actual Pikmin 4 announcement soon, I will cover that immediately. But for now, just look forward to more Pikmin content in the future. If you do need Pikmin content immediately, though, me and some friends on the Super Smash Bros. Are currently Let's Playing Pikmin 1 and updating it periodically, so be sure to check that one out when you get the chance. Alright, I talked, I plugged, I don't think there's anything else I can add. I sincerely hope you enjoyed listening to me babble on for Pikmin for some ungodly, undetermined amount of time. But for now, I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching.